My name is Captain Anthony Grassi, and tonight I'm doing a live bait strategies for striped bass. And tonight's presentation is sponsored by Navionics, Navionics and Gabriel Tackle Company, Bait and Tackle Shop in Brick, New Jersey. I'm actually sitting in the shop now, and along with Frank, the owner, and it's one of my go-to spots in Brick. They're very knowledgeable with fishing. They only sell you what you need, and he's got a great variety of tackle and fresh bait, as well as live bait. So it was a perfect place to do this presentation because Frank stocks a lot of fresh bait that's in season. All right. All right. So tonight we're going to talk about fishing for striped bass, the Atlantic striped bass, Maroon saxatilis. Other people call it stripers, linesiders, rock or rockfish. And striped bass are the most popular saltwater game fish on the East Coast. As you can see, the pictures of a lot of fish that we've caught over the past few seasons. Their migration comes from the waters off of Virginia, North Carolina. There are three main biomasses of striped bass. One is the Chesapeake, one is the Delaware, and the other is the Hudson River biomasses. The number one is the Chesapeake, and the second is the Hudson River, and the third is the Delaware. And in the right corner, you could see the migration of the striped bass as they're coming out of their traditional spawning grounds and migrating north in the spring, as far as now Canada and the northern provinces of Canada, and then back south to Carolina and Virginia. Also, it's been caught down as far south as Florida. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a presentation on mojo fishing. And another type of fishing that we do is to use live bait. And you want to know what's on the menu, what striped bass eat. And the list here to the left is pretty much a variety of things that they're known to eat. Spearing, anchovies, all types of crabs, blue claw, fiddler, calico, eels, different species of eels, squid, clams, mussels, and lobsters and worms of all different types of worms. So a lot of times when you're fishing for them, the main thing is to match the hatch for when you're using bait. So first one that I'm going to talk about are eels. A lot of times we like to use eels in the late spring and early fall. And throughout the fall, you can see how Frank keeps his eels nice and fresh in these big 100-gallon Rubbermaid live wells with filtration system. So the eels are always nice and fresh. That's something that you want to have with eels. When you're storing them on the boat, what I'd like to do is store them in wet newspaper or seaweed or grass. I don't like to keep them in water because the water will get really they'll lose all the oxygen, and it'll get acidic, and then they'll die. So the best way I like to keep them is just wet rags, and also eel grass is a great way. Just keep them wet and out of the sun, and the eels will last a long time. A lot of times I'll even put an ice pack underneath them to slow them down a little bit. But a lot of times when we're doing tournaments, we don't necessarily use eels, but we always do carry them with us because they can be very effective. One of the rigs that I like to use for fishing for eels is, just a standard three-way swivel, and to have a 3 to 4 foot, 50-pound fluorocarbon leader. Not as big as it. The eels are big up to a 7/0, but mostly use like a live bait 4/0 Gamakatsu hook. Uh, like this is a good standard hook for eels. Circle hooks, live bait hooks work very well. I'll put a 1 foot dropper so that it keeps the eels off the bottom. So when we're drifting eels, which is the preferred method of fishing them, I like to keep the eels a little higher so that they're not always looking to bury themselves in nooks and crannies and then getting snagged. I do put a lighter leader, 30-pound leader, so that if you do get a snag with the bank sinker, you lose the sinker, but you still keep the leader and the eel. And it's just a basic, typical rig that we'll use when we're eel fishing. Some of the places that we like to use. Now, I'm using areas that I fish, but if you're not local, these same areas, but different places will work. One of the areas that we like to fish is in the Hudson River. The water could get kind of deep, 65, 70 feet. And also the tide can also move up to 5, 6 knots. So when we're fishing those areas, we want to make sure that we're using heavy sinkers to keep the eels at the bottom. And that's why I prefer using a three-way rig and not a fish finder rig, is so that you have contact and you'll feel any of the hits. So you could see using my Navionics chart that I put up here. Now this was a chart that I just took off the internet. They have a free chart viewer, and you could see the 1 foot contours, the changes, and I like to fish along these areas and between flats or shallow areas like this. These are the type of areas that I like to drift eels. Also in canals, right now, the Point Pleasant Canal is a good area to drift eels at night near bridge abutments. Also another effective place to fish. One good thing about eels is if you don't use them up all night, you still could keep them next to your boat and keep them in a trap. The only thing, don't make the mistake that we've made a couple of times, which is to let them go in your live well. A lot of times they'll sneak into those small holes, even if they're the outflow holes. They'll get in there and clog up your live well. Another bait we like to use, especially in the spring, just before the menhaden or bunker arrive, are clams. This is a picture we took today of the clams that Frank has. Nice, large surf clams, nice and fresh. Beach fishermen, boat fishermen like to use clams. Generally, when you're fishing clams, we'll fish them from anchored boat, and we'll chum with the shells and the extra guts that come out of the clams. But with this, I like to use a similar rig of a fish finder rig, and also a circle hook, again, depending on the size of the clams, 30 to 60 pound fluorocarbon leader, and a quality barrel swivel. And this is pretty much all you need. A lot of times when we're fishing tournaments, we'll have 4 or 5 rigs out, usually using a bait runner style reel, so that you have very little drag. So when the fish picks up the clam and they take off, you have a chance to set the hook. Areas that we like to fish here up in the Raritan Bay is a couple of areas that I like to clam. One's called Flynn's Knoll. It's a traditional spring, early spring fishing area where a lot of the migrating stripers will come to first. You see in this area here, there's a lot of structure, a lot of different depths ranging from 10 to 20 feet. Another area is Romer Shoal, which is an area right here, which used to be the Romer Shoal Lighthouse. Uh, Before that was taken out by Hurricane Sandy. But these type of areas are usually effective places to anchor up and to fish clams. One drawback about clams is a lot of times you'll get dogfish, especially in the early part of the season. Again, cracking the shells, I use like a small uh, handled hammer or a little mini bat, and then after we'll gut the meat out of the shell, I'll take the shell and kind of just hit it off to the side of the boat so that it'll sink quickly and it'll emit some chum. Another early area that we like to fish up here in this area, Round Shoal. Again, early spring, these areas that are shallower, 10 to 20 feet, the water heats up early, and that's when a lot of small worms and crabs and some of the shellfish will come out of the mud to absorb some of that sunlight. And this is going to be the early places the bass will come to. So, other than eels and worms and clams, uh, our favorite bait to use, uh, especially for tournaments and to catch large bass, is the bunker or menhaden. As you could see some of those pictures here. So the Atlantic menhaden, they swim in large schools. They're different sizes, so they're named. You have the large menhaden, and then when the smaller ones, they call them peanut bunker, which will start more prevalent in the middle summer. But the large menhaden, which grow up to a foot long, is a very important aspect of the biomass of pelagic fish in our area. It's an important species. They are also used for like animal feed and oils for human consumption, which is a bad thing because they're just grinding them up and using them for feed for animals and stuff. Omega proteins. There's a lot of big purse seiners that come in and wipe out these schools. Therefore, nothing for the striped bass to eat. But because of groups that are run by a friend of mine, Paul Eidman, menhadendefenders.org is if you want to get more information about this. Uh, it's a really important part of the cycle for striped bass, bluefish, and most inshore fish from Maine down south to Florida. And again, depending on your area, they have different names for it. We call it bunker here in the Northeast, but in different areas, they call them pogies or moss bunker, menhaden, things like that. So how to catch them? So there's a couple of ways. By far, the most popular method of catching bunker is by snagging them. The only problem about the snag and drop method, which we prefer not to use, is because when a fish bites a live bunker with the snag built into it, it's very difficult to release the fish because there's giant treble hooks. Um, so that's kind of a downfall. Also, when you're snagging bunker, it's dangerous because you're dragging them through the water. You're snapping them with large spinning outfits, and a lot of times these things will become mini missiles and not only hit people but also do some gel coat damage on the side of your boat. Over the past few years, I've been doing a lot of seminars and webinars on how to throw a cast net, and it's very easy to do, and it's a very effective way because if you're snagging a bunch of bunker, one they don't live long in your live well, depending on where you're snagging them, and the second thing is it takes a lot of time. It's easier to throw the cast net once on a school of fish, get your 30, 40 pieces, throw them in the live well, and you're good to go. So using a snag, it just takes a lot longer. All right, and it's also very difficult to release fish when they swallow. So we like to use the cast net. We've done some webinars on throwing cast nets. We have a very simple method on how to do it. Make the investment in a quality net, um, something like a Guide Secret cast net. A large bunker net should be a 1-inch, 2-inch stretch mesh, and it should be minimally, our state legal limit is a 10-foot net, and that's about all you need, because once you throw it, as you can see in the middle picture here on the right, one good throw is all you're going to need to catch all the fresh bait that you're going to need. And it's also important that if you're not going to do this and you're going to buy bait at your local tackle shop, like Frank has here, he gets fresh bunker in every day. They're iced down, they're fresh. So if you're only going to use a couple of pieces, it may just be easier to go, to his shop and pick up a couple of nice fresh pieces. So one of the important things I tell people too is don't take too much. You could get kind of, get overwhelmed quickly with catching 2 or 3 of these nets, and really you only needed probably 20 or 30 pieces at the most for the day. So just take what you need and, let go what you don't, or even keep a few pieces for your crab traps. But we do have tutorials online for throwing a net on the Navionics webinar website. If you look in the past webinars, I have a few with step-by-step easy ways to throw. And also, if you see us at any of the saltwater fishing shows, you could see us do the demos right there. Again, don't overcrowd. Keep only what you need. Most live wells, good-sized live wells, could really only keep 20 or 30 baits in them. So don't put 75 baits in them, because what will happen is from the overcrowding, they'll die, and then they'll be useless and washed out. Make sure you have a high gallons per hour live well. Oxygen is good. Circular live wells are better, because then they're not, trapping themselves in the corner. The one on the left is a better live well than the one on the right. Rounded corners are always better anyway for live fish. So the rods that we like to use are, 7-foot, medium heavy, spin or casting. We use Lamaglass rods. The 70-30 seems to be a good combination. Temple Fork makes 7-foot rods that are also good in a casting or spinning rod. If we're using the bait runner spinning spinners, then like a 7-foot up to 30-pound medium heavy or medium rod will work to set up a good spread. Lamaglass makes a very reasonable rod in the $100 to $150 range. That'll be a effective rod for what you're doing. Reels, Daiwa reels are really good. Canyon reels work also well in this area. Frank has a good supply of Canyon reels at his shop. The Salt 4000 is a good spinning reel, and the 13 and 15 HS is a good reel, packed with braid, 50-pound master braid. Cortland master braid is a good line to use. It's got a thin diameter. Power Pro, most of the braids that are in the market today are quality. We just like to use specific sponsor, lines. I find the master braid doesn't, you don't get as many wind knots, and it doesn't bleed as a lot of the competitors. And also using braid instead of mono is being able to have minimal line drag, as well as shock. It doesn't stretch as much. So rigs, one of the rigs I showed you before, which is good for drifting. Um, if you're going to use a live bunker, you have a all you need is really a 3-foot leader, 50, 60 pounds, quality swivel, and a slide sinker. And this is your standard rig with the 7 or 8-aught, 9-aught inline offset or circle hook, similar to like this, is a perfect rig for drifting live bunker. You could easily, why we like to have the slide sinker is that you could take the sinker off if the fish are hitting, the top part of the water column, or if they're in the middle, you could put a 1 or 2 ounce just to get them down a little bit. And if you need a heavy sinker, if the fish are on the bottom, uh, you know, that'll work as well. Make sure you check in your bunker often. When you're fishing with live bunker, you're definitely gonna start feeling the difference between a 1-pound fish pulling, or when they start getting really nervous, and a fish is on their tail. You could feel it, especially with braid line. You could feel the difference. Hook placement, if you're fishing a live bunker, um, if you're in the front part of the bait, this should make the fish swim down. If you're setting the hook in a couple of different areas in the back, either on the top or on the bottom here, this will keep the fish generally swimming up and away from the boat. So these are generally the 2 areas that will fish with a live bunker. We'll put the hook in the lip, or usually right in the back, right in front of the dorsal, or underneath here. There's a good piece of meat here and a good piece here. These are good hook placements for a live bunker. So another way of fishing live bunker is, and it's a very effective way of doing it, is trolling. And we'll troll, we like to use a longer leader for this, and we'll troll, especially areas between channels, areas that are about 20, 25 feet deep, and 2 to 3 knots. We'll troll 1 on each side of the boat, usually in our outrodders, the Maja outrodders, 1 on each side, and you'll get very explosive top water action like you see in that bottom right hand corner. 8-aught or 9-aught circle hook usually works well with this. Usually when a fish hits it, they take it. These aren't usually your schoolie fish or small fish. These are usually big fish that are taking these live trolled bunker. And again, areas that are large, between channels, near rips, near tide changes, near contour changes are always good areas to troll. One of the reasons I like to troll is to find, fish. Instead of just drifting and waiting, you could cover a lot more area trolling them. One important thing to do is to watch the way the fish swims, and that'll dictate how fast you could troll. Depending on the current, the wave heights, the wind, and tidal flow will change the way you are swimming the bait. But this is a very effective way. I watched a guy do this 20 years ago, and especially when bass season starts slowing down, end of June and beginning of July, this is definitely an effective way to find fish. So, symbiotic relationship between bass and blues. The bass are opportunistic feeders. A lot of times, what I'll do is I'll cut a piece of that tail off, and what'll happen is, as the bunker will be, you'll find bass under schools of bluefish, especially because the bass are just waiting for these tiny, these baits to fall down. As you can see here, the hook placement was right there, and the bluefish took a nice chunk out of it. Sometimes you'll catch the bluefish, but a lot of times you'll just bite the tail. A lot of times I'll cut a good section of the tail so that it'll swim more erratic, and and try to get it below the bluefish school, and you'll pick up a good size bluefish. So live bait tips: try hooking the bait in different places. Experiment. That's the most important thing. Put 2 or 3 live ones out. Don't do more than that, because a lot of times they'll cross up. So you put one up in the bow, maybe one midship, and one in the out of the transom. Make sure you use circle hooks, and the hookups will increase when you're using circle hooks. We like to use big hooks, 8/0, 9/0 hooks. Also fluorocarbon leader. Make sure that the leaders are clean. Make sure you don't have any chafing on the leader, and using the correct weight if needed. So using anywhere from 1 to 10-ounce sinkers. Have a collection depending on where you're marking your fish. Another here you can see a picture of one of our clients, that he caught not even a really big bass, but look at the size of the bait that this fish took. Finding structure is really important. Traditional areas. This was on my mobile device. Most of our devices are now synced with our plotters, so we'll use our Navionics mobile phone apps or iPad apps. We'll connect them to our chart plotters so that we could sync all of our electronics together and share waypoints and manage our waypoint systems. So a lot of areas, traditional areas to fish striped bass. The Shrewsbury Rocks is a great place. Right now, a lot of people are catching some big fish. A friend of mine caught a 49-pounder, 48-pounder the other day just outside of the rocks. So this area historically will hold a lot of fish, and it's a great place to use live bunker. One of the things you're also going to do is you're going to catch some big bluefish there as well. So a lot of times people ask me, what it's like when you're fishing large, pods of bait. I don't like to fish right on top of the bait or even cut through them. You could see the way these anglers and the way we're set up, that we allow the bait pod to move without getting scattered. Remember, the injured fish will drop out of the school, and that's why we'll fish on the outsides of these schools, so that they're easy prey. Remember, opportunistic feeders. A lot of times the bass will wait for the bait to come to them. So we'll go to the edge, and then we'll drop back, and that's when a bass will usually take a bait. When to fish? I always like to fish 2 hours before and after high tide. It generally doesn't mean you got to wake up, early morning. I like to fish the tides, especially if I'm fishing up in the New York Harbor. I'll use my mobile app to make sure that I'm fishing the right areas, the right tides. Also to check the water currents. That's also important, and wind direction too. So one of the things that Frank said is, if you're in the area and you come to his shop, which is on Manilokin Road in Brick Township, if you mention the code FinChasers, he's going to give you 10% off on the purchase of bait till this weekend. So it gives you a couple of days over the weekend to come down, check out the shop, use the code FinChasers. He's got some of the best prices in the area, and also, most importantly, quality of bait is important. So let's see. If you have any questions, again, it's important. I mean, if you've been on Facebook, you've been on any social media platform, you know how important and what the topic of people catch and release is nowadays, that it's an important, to fish to preserve. Although we're having some good days out there, uh, overall, the fish stocks are not improving, and we need to release a lot of the spawning females. There's all different um, debates on uh, size limits uh, or fishing slot limits. But generally, right now, what the legal limits are for New York and New Jersey, and also to release any of the fish that are the larger fish, 30 pounds and above, so that they get a chance, to lay a couple of million eggs. Um, Up in our area, they go up in the Hudson River and Hackensack and other tributaries in the Raritan Bay in New York Harbor. That's all right. You can also check out our TV show, The FinChasers, which is airing on Destination America as well as Discovery Channel this season. You could catch us also on Amazon Prime as well. Some of the shows we do highlight catching striped bass as well. So if you have any questions, I'll take them now. If not, you can email me for charter information or for any questions at finchasernj@gmail.com, or call me at 848-221-0093 for any charter information or any questions that you may have. All right. Any questions about anything we covered, or something that you might have a question about? All right. Looks like I covered pretty much everything that we need to talk about. Again, if you have any questions, also check out other webinars that I've done on navionics.com. And I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. And also, I'd like to thank Frank for hosting me tonight for this, this webinar on live bait fishing. Hope everybody has a great night and have a great fishing season. Take care.